So with me we have Jess Thirlby, who of course is head coach for England Netball. Hi Jess.
Hello.
Paula Dunn, former sprinter and performance director at UK Athletics.
Good morning.
And Stephanie Hilborne is with me in the studio, CEO of Women in Sport.
Good morning.
So some of the findings of this study are depressing, bit worrying. I'm sure some of them won't surprise you. So let's get stuck into that, I guess. You know, one of the headlines that female coaches are twice as likely to be bullied and harassed than men. Was that something that shocked you, Paula?
Probably not. I think it's been a lot of anecdotal evidence to say that it's difficult. It's more difficult for a female in competitive sport. Definitely, the higher you go up the pathway, you always kind of hope it's not, but it is probably a very much a true reflection of what actually happens on the ground. And I think when we talk about bullying, it's probably a lot of that microaggression, that constant, belittling, feeling isolated, so I think that to me would be where I would see it happening. It's those microaggressions where it kind of just erodes your confidence, which is obviously the opposite what we're trying to do. So I'm not surprised now.
And you say I've seen, or that you would see. Have you experienced as well?
I think so. I'm a little bit blinkered sometimes. So if somebody gives me negative feedback, or I kind of just go like a bull in a china shop to prove everybody wrong. But definitely there's been comments about, can you be strong enough to have a tough conversation? Can you really lead a team? Just that those comments that kind of erode your confidence if you're not confident enough. And like everybody else, you're going to have ups and downs and ebbs and flows with your confidence. So definitely been in that situation. But I think for me, I've always had a lot of really good allies in that space as well. People to pick me up when you're feeling down. And as my mother always says, it's kind of a reflection of the person who's bullying rather than you. It's usually something within them. So that's kind of where I always take, comfort in. It's actually it's a reflection on them rather than me.
Jess, one would think of netball as being dominated by female coaches, but that doesn't mean that you can't experience bullying from another female. Is my perception wrong in terms of the balance of gender in coaching in netball, or is it predominantly female?
No, I think it would be absolutely fair to say that, we're a unapologetically female-focused sport, but that doesn't mean that we don't embrace and encourage both genders to contribute to the development and growth of our game. And I think even more so at kind of the participation level and through the kind of academy part of a system, you're seeing more and more brilliant examples of both men and women coming into our sport and promoting it and celebrating it for what it is. But I agree with you, Gabby. I think sometimes the sadness is, as Paul has already said, it's in the subtleties of the undermining nature of some of the behaviours within coaching cultures, but also, I think, women, we often talk about, and we're part of some brilliant groups, the Women's Sport Collective Hub being one of them, that, creates a fantastic community to build women up and to champion each other. But I would say absolutely, I agree with you. It's obviously not exclusively about men bullying women in coaching. It can happen, across the board. Hopefully, it's something that this report will draw attention to, because we want a safe environment that champions the growth and development of coaches and all coaches. But yes, I would say agree with you. It can be any gender.
And it is just one factor, Stephanie, isn't it, that would perhaps stop somebody on their journey as a coach, and is one of the reasons why there are so few female coaches at the very, very top across a lot of sports. I think the figure at the last Olympic Games, it had risen from 17% to about 24% of coaches at the Olympic Games were female.
I think that's definitely the generous end of that. But there has been a focus, hasn't it? They've been worrying about it at every level, internationally and nationally, the lack of female representation. And what was interesting in this study, it was a study of nearly 2,000 male and female coaches, and some of them were lapsed coaches. And if you looked at the data of, these were soft cultural issues we were exploring, of the coaches that had left, how heard and how respected and how valued they felt, that was right down for the female coaches. It was virtually unaltered for the male coaches. The male coaches are leaving for different reasons. So there's a very strong issue about retention. In fact, I think really we should, as a sports system, focus on retention, because if we can retain the great women in now, that will give us the right platform and be evidence of the right culture to be bringing more women in.
So the thing we also need to look at then is barriers to entry in the first place, isn't it? And why women don't feel coaching is necessarily a career for them or a pathway for them, because we're talking grassroots as well, which is often unpaid, and it's harder for a lot of women with young families to say they're going to go and do some unpaid work perhaps after hours than it may be as a male, because women are the prime carers so often. Paula, do you see that in athletics?
Definitely. I think if you look at myself and Jess, I think we are probably like most females who reach a certain level in sport have been ex-international athletes. So for me, being an ex-international athlete, I was used to being at the house 4, 5, 6 days a week, and I had a really strong network of support to my mum, my sister, my brother, who helped with the childcare. But when I finished, I made a decision to go to coaching. It was really tough because you've got to balance all these things. I had to balance work, being a wife, being a mother, being a daughter. And that's before I left the house. Whether I like it or not, most of the childcare was down to me in terms of who's going to look after the children, who's going to feed them, schoolwork, then next morning who's going to get the school uniforms ready. And I said, my husband used to just walk in, pick up his sports bag and go out. And I had to do this litany of things to make sure it was all the organisation was in place. So it is tough. I think when you've been in the sport a long time, you understand the constraints on your time, but you're used to being out of the house. And so for me, it kind of continued unabated, that I went from being an athlete training to just went coaching at the grassroots, totally free, because I wanted to give back. But there is only a certain amount of time people can do that for. So there's definitely focus where we need to make sure. And it's really hard because you want to make sure that you're encouraging all types of women, some great women to come into coaching, but you also understand that it is generally unpaid at the beginning of your career. It's very intense, it's very challenging, very rewarding, and you've got to have a lot of energy to do it. So from the grassroots, I think you can do things to make it easier. You can look at the training times, you can look at, I used to bring my son with me to training, and he actually competed as well when they were young, so that made it easier. But it's hobbies and sport is tough. It's just very challenging, and it gets harder but easier in terms of when paid jobs come along, because then it becomes your career. But initially it is very much voluntary led.
I was going to say, is that almost a given that at the very beginning, Jess, you're going to be doing this unpaid 0 hours contracts to get yourself into a position where you might, if you're lucky, be offered remuneration for the hours you're putting in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would concur with what Paula said. Often I've put my hand up for things as a young person as well, transitioning from playing to coaching, just to simply build that level of experience and knowledge base, and to kind of just want to learn, like you want to learn. And so you kind of grab every opportunity with or without payment. But I think that kind of mental load that you have before you even walk into a room to try and become the best version of yourself as a coach is an unspoken, it's almost like something you worry about expressing, like the toll that it might take or is taking. And like Paula, I'm lucky that I played the sport. So yes, there's a familiarity with what's coming. You don't go in with your eyes closed, but coaching is so vocational. It's 360 often. Have I been asked, is it harder? Absolutely, than performing. There's an element of kind of better boundaries with the performer. You train, the fatigue, obviously physical and mental is high, but it's about you often and you alone. Whereas as a coach, you're taking on that brilliant privilege and burden of concerning yourself with the development and growth of multiple individuals 24 hours a day for a long time. And I think not only is it the introduction and a sense of belonging and people coming into the sport, but I think, as you and Stephanie have touched on, is it sustainable? And so the fallout from women in coaching is because I think I don't think we know any other way than to give our whole selves to everything that we do. And I think there are a lot of perception issues around, seeing it as a hobby rather than a career, and almost assumptions that we should be okay with that. And I think that's an unfair assumption. And I think we're battling some perceptions around it's a nice to do for us to get out of the house, to move away from some of our daily responsibilities, when actually most of us really want to get into it because we're passionate about growing our game and to see the best version of other people. And if we can play a part in that, but we're ultimate servants, as coaches, we're servants to the needs of those around us, and we're driven by a passion. And so that needs to be harnessed. And payment is one form of that, but it's often not our motivator. I wouldn't be doing coaching if money was my driver. That's not what I'm in it for. But I think, again, it's kind of a quietly accepted, well, it's okay, until we, start to moan and complain, and then we're seen as difficult. And I think that's also an unfair perception of how we operate as women in sport.
The landscape certainly has changed in terms of the figureheads and the women that we can look up to who have, and I was just looking even down the list of Sports Personality of the Year coach winners, and that has increased so much over the last few years because of the likes of Sarina Wiegman, Emma Hayes. You've got Jane Frigero, who was the diving coach for Tom Daley and others, and has won a lot of Olympic medals under her watch. And there are many others, but those women getting the headlines and getting the accolades, I think is so important as an example to others that you can be at the top of your game and be judged on what you're achieving, not on who you are and what you look like.
I think what's happened with that, exactly as you say, but also, of course, the team sport we've seen now on TV, women's team sport, which when I was young you literally never saw. It has definitely changed perceptions, but there's a big lag now in the system, and one of the critical places is in coaching. So if you look, where are the big gender gaps? It's at the very top of leadership of the sports organisations, and it's in the coaching workforce. And I think absolutely, listening to Jess and Paula speak, the amazing commitment that coaches have, the millions of coaches there are, the way they're changing lives every day. And most of us can talk about coaches who changed our lives. We must look after them better. And what we're finding is, from this study, that both men and women are facing a pretty tough environment, antisocial hours, all the things you'd expect, physically tougher conditions in terms of sometimes it's being freezing cold outside, etc., and giving so much of themselves to change other people's lives. And that's true for men and women. But what the survey definitely showed is there are certain aspects still in the culture which are definitely not equal. So that's whether you get your first 1 hour of coaching paid, whether you get your first 0 hours contract. What we found were that there were many more men on the permanent contracts and more women on the less favourable contracts. And then within that, there was a really strong angle of difference between how much effort was put into thinking about your progression. And maybe that links back that, we're not really seen as that's going to be our career. We're really primarily about looking after our children and, whatever. We haven't
So when the
down.
final decision's coming between two candidates, there is still a bias there.
There's probably still a bias there, but it's more about conversations about progression, that they're not happening as often, or investment in your continuing professional development. That's not happening as often. And there's a sense of the women not feeling as heard. And then right at the end, which you mentioned right at the beginning about bullying, the stats there were pretty horrendous. And so 30% of women, 15% men say they're experiencing bullying. The men said that came mostly from sort of the local committees or what was described as management. For the women, it was other coaches, and it was predominantly male coaches. And that's just not acceptable. And then 1 in 5 women were saying they were being harassed, and principally sexually harassed. And that was also by other coaches. And that is so unacceptable. Both men and women coaches are suffering from aggression and violence from parents largely, which is also unacceptable. But if it's from within the system, it feels that there must be more that sports could do to help from top down, to help people understand what is misogyny, because actually this isn't really your place. This is really our place. You shouldn't really be leading. You shouldn't really be having a position of authority. We still haven't, as a society, quite equalised those perceptions. And in female coaching, you've got both of those things. So it does feel like a sort of particularly Well, the survey shows it feels to these women like a particularly unwelcoming environment to a lot of them, not all of them.
And there will be, I suppose, personal decisions made, won't there, about in terms of a drop-off, in the same way that we've been battling for years to stop young girls, teenage girls, dropping out of sport. You know, there will be a moment, and it still happens in careers for women, doesn't it, where they get to a point where they decide they just can't do that juggle anymore and they want to focus on family, and their career progression stops. So there is a societal, cultural issue here that is not just specific to coaching. But what I'd like to focus on next, if it's all right, is why it's important that we have female coaches and what they do for the athletes and the sports people they're working with, and what they can give them, Paula, in just a different way of coaching. Do you see different styles and different communication techniques when you look at male and female coaches?
I think you do. I hate going down that track. This is female and this is male. I think there's both sexes can have really good qualities, but I think I guess
it's why is it important that we get more women in? You know, what
definitely.
are they offering?
I think you look at your background and you know. You are who you are, but I think I definitely show more empathy. I can definitely understand and relate to a female, whether it be a colleague or an athlete, because you've walked some of their steps, and it's always a little bit easier when you know you've been through some of the challenges they're facing. So I think the qualities is that, and I do believe that you should have diversity. So when any athlete or colleague sat there looking up at the team, it should reflect the athletes that they're supporting. So, you know, I'm a big believer, like, you know, it should be male and female, you know, right across the board. That's in the medical team, in your coaching team, in your management team. And also, you know, diversity in, like, you know, you should have black people up there, you know, because these are role models and can make a huge difference to how you perceive yourself moving through the system, and if there's going to be a place for you. So I think, I always struggle, because I just think I'm just very caring. I look at the whole person, and I think that's always been my style, to look at not just the athlete but the person. And I think if you can get to know the person, you're going to get a great performer. And I think sometimes what we've tried to do in the past is split the athlete from that person, which is always really difficult. So I kind of do take more of a holistic approach. But I always say to people, it's not the soft approach. People get confused. You know, looking at somebody's entirety doesn't mean you're not taking the sport seriously. We are absolutely taking the sport seriously, but we're just aware of, you know, the things that could impact upon them. So I think that's obviously, I can't speak for all women, but I think the women I work with, they definitely bring this diversity for how to approach problems. And when you're in a room, you know, I'm like a lot of people, sometimes I'm the only female in that room, and it just gives a different lens to a problem rather than seeing it from one angle, which I think is always useful as well.
Your experiences in life are just different, aren't they? So
absolutely.
So you're able to perhaps see a solution to a problem in a different way. Jess, I know we discussed at the beginning that netball has predominantly been played by women. I know there are men playing now, and it's predominantly been coached. And you look at the other team sports that are dominating, football and rugby for women. Obviously, the recent Red Roses victory in the World Cup, was a male head coach who took over from a male head coach. Sarina Wiegman obviously took over from Phil Neville. And there have been a few more female head coaches actually of football, which probably shows their progression as professional sports, maybe. Do you see a time when a man would be coaching England's netball team?
Oh, that's a really great question. I agree that, you know, it's dangerous to go down the route of one or the other. I'm a big believer in cultivate, a staff team here that has diversity of thinking, diversity of experiences and skills. And I think any of us, and we should be expected to be able to be agile with having skills that mean we can react and respond to any individual athlete or person, whether that sits in our preferences or not. But I think there are some fundamental differences between the way men and women think, behave, you know, like that's just fact. And so I think what you see those of us in the lead roles, you know, that absolutely we're the kind of face of that sport or that team. But you take half a pace back and you look in the environment, and if you're not seeing diversity of thinking, skills, male, female, all of the above, then I think we're falling short, because that for me is normally the crux that makes an environment really, really successful. And a good leader will know what they're lacking and who they need. And if that be male or female, it shouldn't really matter, but it's just your attention to detail in that space so that you best accommodate and support the needs of each individual. And I won't be the best fit for everybody, I know that, but that doesn't mean it's an excuse for me to not be the best version and coach that I can be for as many of my athletes, and across our team and our staff team, make sure that I've filled those gaps accordingly.
Because that's an important point, Jess, isn't it? That you're not just coaching those athletes often, you're also looking after other non-athletes within a team, or recognising what they need to do the best jobs they can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, one of the greatest strengths that I'd like to think I and or other female coaches bring is I actually think we're really efficient, and I think we think creatively, because I think some of those, whether I'm being too generalised here, but some of those kind of other responsibilities that we've spoken about, and look, we're not all the same. Not everyone has children, not everyone has the same experience, but I just think that kind of gender difference in terms of some of the mental load and some of the stereotypes that we either have to accept or are still part of our norm. I know for me, it makes me far more efficient. I'm far more efficient the busier I am than I am when I get more time. So the one thing I ask for all the time as a coach is more time. I'm actually worse with it because I've learned the behaviours and skills to be better, busy, and how to manage that cognitive load and think differently about solving problems. I'm a bit like Paula. If anyone tells me something can't be done, then I'm definitely here to prove otherwise. And I don't do the too hard basket. There's always a way. It's just how willing you are to think differently about solving the problem. And I do think as women, for all the kind of empathy and compassion that is often associated with our approach, I do think there's just a general problem solving ability and an efficiency that we learn. It's a learned skill, because more often than not, we're under the pump, whether that be in our personal lives or in our professional lives. I think it sets us up nicely for coaching jobs where they're in, it's high demand, but it's high reward, and you have a great duty to the players and athletes that you serve.
I mentioned Sarina Wiegman, and I think it's really interesting how she is reported. How at the beginning of her appointment there was a lot made of her direct communication, and people put that down to her being Dutch, and we like this because she tells us exactly what it is and how it is. And then when she's had to make difficult decisions, she's probably not found them that difficult at all, but she's made decisions that people have found difficult to take. The communication was then perceived to be, there's a recent, obviously, an incident that's happened with England's goalkeepers, was perceived to be too direct, and people kind of, and I was wondering at the time whether that was the perception of her as a female, and that actually if a male coach had delivered that news and changed his goalkeeper, whether or not we would have even considered it was to do with communication. Stephanie?
Well, I'm sure on that one that there was a gendered aspect to the way the whole thing was reported, for sure. But if you actually look at sort of business leadership by women, often it's women who do make difficult decisions and are often brought in to make change. So this whole sort of concept that you have to sound sort of macho and sound aggressive when you're making difficult decisions, they're just not connected. I mean, often the difficult decisions, the things people don't want to hear, you might find that, the female wiring, which I'm sure is not all innate, but as Jess was saying, it's probably learned, is very helpful for saying things people don't want to hear, perhaps in quite a kind way sometimes. But I think that's, I think what we know at Women, and that's slightly speculative what I'm saying there, in some things I've read, but what we know for sure at Women in Sport is that the girls we talk to often are saying they want to have somebody coaching them who has gone through their lived experience. And we did a massive piece of research on black girls who had the highest rates of dreaming of reaching the top of sport, but the lowest engagement in sport. And they were saying they wanted female coaches to lead them. Black female, great, but they wanted female coaches. At least they understood a lot of their lived experience. So there's a very important thing there. Also, if the research done on boys, little boys, under 11 boys, showed that they are still being very gender stereotyped around sport. And so the more positive female role models that they have within sport, if they've got a female sports coach, they're probably going to have a very different attitude towards women in sport. So it's a massively important thing for just adjusting concepts of masculinity and sport as well. So there's a lot in there. It's not saying that men, as we've seen with the Red Roses, can't be absolutely wonderful coaches of women, but it's just to understand that, you know, particularly when we've still got this massive gender gap in the playing of team sport, and there is this sort of constant drop off, as you say, at teenager girls playing sport. Having female leaders in sport matters at every single level.
Do you think it matters? Emma Hayes has spoken quite a lot in the past about the fact that when she's got to the very top, you know, she wins Olympic gold, and people say, well, are you going to manage a men's Premier League side now? As if that, and she's always kind of had the argument, well, why should that be the pinnacle for me? You know, but she has said that actually the flip side of that's when we'll really know that there is equality in coaching. Do you think that it matters? You know, if that's seen as the kind of highest accolade in this country, that, you know, the country's dominant sport, male football, that there needs to be female coaches making their way to the very top, Paula, to kind of give the perception that women can coach anybody in any sport?
No. I just think we're at different stages of our development, and we probably could, if given the opportunity, do that, but you need the opportunity, so somebody's got to do that first of all. But I think success is what you do, what you start off with. And so people who reach the top, you know, whether it be female, you know, ladies football or athletics or not netball, is that what have you done to create positive change? And that's the question. What legacy have you left behind? You know, so for me, does it matter if it's a male or female? I think it'd be brilliant for the story. But if the opportunities, that we need the opportunities from grassroots through the pathways to build up that skill set, to build up that knowledge base, then when the opportunity comes along, I think we will definitely see it. But is that a pinnacle success? I don't think so. It depends who's grading it. I think the fact that we've got two absolutely amazing female teams, and, you know, the netball, that's my second favourite sport, so I'm very invested in that, winning medals, and, you know, the general population, that sports personality, that which is a general, they see it. They see quality. So for me, that isn't a measure of success. I think that's somebody else's idea of what success looks like. But it will happen. But again, I don't think that should take away from anybody what they've done in their own sport at all.
Talking about the qualities, you know, when I asked the question about why it's important we have female coaches, and you could argue the post-1966, the most successful England manager we've had is Gareth Southgate in terms of getting teams to finals. And one of the things that he did was change the culture within the squads. And that culture, that shift, was I would argue through kind of the kinds of qualities that we're talking about that female coaches bring, in terms of the harmony, the way they wanted to play together, being able to communicate with players, treat them as individuals, understand, you know, that they were different people, not just robots going out there to compete, and not having an environment that was cliquey, which was one of the things that was previously accused of previous coaches. So it's a shift. I could think it's not just female coaches, is it? There's a shift in the way we coach, and you speak to any ex-footballers now who go into clubs and they say, gosh, the way we were treated as young footballers, male footballers, compared to the way the young footballers are treated now is so different. You're nodding there, Paula.
Yeah. I just look back and we're treating them like individuals now, which we should have always been done that. But, you know, you learn a method of coaching and you're very rigid. And I love what Gareth's done. I was on a course with Gareth, and so to me, what he did, he focused on the culture. He focused on them wanting to be involved, be a group, a collective, and he supported his players. Even when it wasn't popular, he supported them. And I think culturally that was the best thing that could have happened. And I think young people are different. So we can't coach them like we did in the past. They demand to be valued, they demand to be cared for, and their well-being and mental health is important, as it should be. So I'm loving the way the sport is going, and people panic thinking it's going to decrease performance, but it's not. It's actually going to enhance performance. And so, to me, it's definitely the way forward, that cultural aspect. I'm a big believer in getting the right culture, the right people, get the right behaviours, you'll achieve your objectives.
And definitely the best way to endorse that is success on the sporting field of play, whatever sport that is, isn't it? If a team could be successful with that kind of leadership. And that permeates into business and other areas of society.
Yeah, I mean, bringing up Gareth is a great idea, because I think what we also see is that if you have a group of people and they're more gender balanced, then often the men who are perhaps more, like, I don't know him well, but, you know, the way that Gareth talks about culture, they often feel stronger to be more themselves. And so there's sort of, if there is a man who's being over-dominant, try and avoid the words, I nearly said them, but, you know, being a bit toxic with their masculinity, shall we say, then I think having more women there tends to give the men who are more likely to have the right culture more space to be themselves. And so what you see is a wider improvement in culture. It gives, I think, those men, I've talked to those men about how they feel that they're just, that they can stand up to the guy they should do. And so I think the more we can bring in those men with that culture, and as, you know, Paul is saying, this shift to the person, which will lead to the performance in the culture of sport, the better. I mean, in coaching in particular, it seems to be a massive shift going on.
Yeah. I bet you're not too much of a barker, Jess, are you?
No, it's
when you have to.
No, you know, I agree with Paula. You know, being kind and caring is being direct, honest, and transparent. Like that, I think sometimes we feel they're exclusive of each other. They're not, you know. And I think the best coaches or leaders understand that. And I think, you know, I've been fortunate enough to be in a room with Gareth a number of times, and, you know, what resonates with me is his ability to make a connection on behalf of the teams and athletes he's working on, whether that be to the fans, to the media, to their whole purpose in terms of what they want to go after. But he's also, you know, incredibly respectful, humble, and authentic in the way in which he leads. And I think likewise, you know, you said, you know, will female football coaches will only really have made it if they're leading a male team. I think it's the wrong solution for the wrong problem. I think relative to their abilities, it shouldn't matter. And I think therein lie one of the biggest systemic issues, really, if that's what we're waiting for as a measure of success on ourselves as female coaches in a cross-gender sport. And I think what Gareth has done so well is it's where great leaders for me pay attention to the most important areas, and they stay humble. They're brilliant connectors, and they give people a sense of belonging. And my interactions with Gareth have been all but respectful. And yeah, kudos to him really in terms of how I feel he champions not male or female, but he's just on the right track with how he gets the best out of people. And I think he too has come under criticism because he's not hard enough. And I think, well, I don't know who sets these rules as to what is hard enough, what is too soft. But I think let us be measured by our success, and actually more than that, our longevity and our ability to sustain successful systems that are based on a strong cultural foundation. And I think for me personally, that's what drives me every day. So no, I'm not too much of a barker, but if it's needed, you know, I think that's part of knowing what your team need at any point.
And it's knowing who needs that communication, as you say.
Exactly.
No. Well, best of luck. I know you've got some matches you're playing down there, a series in South Africa. So thank you so much for taking time out today. And Paula, heading towards a world indoors.
Yes.
I'm sure that's keeping you busy, which is taking place in China at the beginning of March. So best of luck with the indoor season.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for coming in, Stephanie.
Thank you.
The Sports Agents
with Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman.